So welcome to a brand new deep dive. I want you to imagine walking into this state-of-the-art laboratory, right?
Okay, I'm picturing it.
You sit down at the absolute most powerful electron microscope in the world. You carefully place this little glass slide under the lens. You dial in the focus all the way down to the atomic level, and you try to you try to find justice
Right.
or like hope or
Okay.
guilt.
Yeah, you'd be staring into that eyepiece for a very, very long time.
Exactly. And that vivid, sort of slightly absurd image, that's exactly where we're starting today.
It is.
Because today we are exploring what happens when a brilliant, wildly successful method of investigation kind of morphs into an absolute worldview.
Which is such an easy trap to fall into.
It really is. I mean, think about it. Science is this magnificent tool. It split the atom, it mapped the human brain, it's peered into the deep cosmos. It has absolutely earned our deepest respect.
Oh, without a doubt.
But maybe it's exactly that respect that should, lead us to remember its boundaries. Because it is so easy for you or me or just anyone living in the modern world to feel totally overwhelmed by the absolute certainty shouting at us from all sides.
Right, because you have these strict, unyielding materialists on one side,
Yeah.
and then rigid, dogmatic believers on the other, and both groups are basically offering complete 100% certainty.
And both are completely exhausting.
They really are.
So our mission today is to explore those actual boundaries of the scientific method, the mysteries of human consciousness, and to try and find, well, the wisdom in intellectual humility. We're going to look at why the word maybe might actually be the most profoundly human word we have.
I love that. And I think the best place to ground this conversation is with the actual brilliance of science itself.
Okay, let's start there.
Because modern science essentially stands on a silent agreement.
A silent agreement. What do you mean by that?
Well, the agreement is that it will only investigate what can be measured, observed, repeated, and tested. That is its self-imposed limit.
Right.
And that restriction is exactly why it's so powerful. It sets very strict boundaries on what it even attempts to look at.
So it's unparalleled at answering the how. Like how a cell divides, how lightning strikes.
Exactly. But it fundamentally struggles with the question of why? Why is there something rather than nothing? What is the objective meaning of good? You can't put those questions into a centrifuge.
Wait, I want to pause here. Because I hear this debate all the time,
Yeah.
right?
Sure.
People argue that because science is so wildly successful at explaining the how, it should just be the only lens we use to view reality. Isn't that just like the logical next step?
Well, no, and that is where we have to define a really crucial distinction from our sources today, the difference between methodological naturalism and materialism.
Okay, I'm going to need you to translate those into plain English for me. What is the actual difference?
Absolutely. So science operates on methodological naturalism. That simply means when a scientist walks into a lab, they agree to follow a specific method. They look only for natural causes.
So no ghosts or miracles in the math equation.
Right. It's a rule of the game, and it is a highly effective method. But, and here's the catch taking that method and turning it into materialism.
Which is what, exactly?
Materialism is the absolute belief that only physical matter exists in the entire universe and nothing else.
Okay.
Making that jump is a massive philosophical leap. It is a worldview. It's not a scientific fact.
Ah, I see. It's like a guy walking onto a beach with a metal detector, right?
Yeah.
He spends all day sweeping the sand. He finds a handful of coins, maybe some rusty nails. And if he concludes, hey, my tool is great at finding metal, that is methodological naturalism.
Going on.
But if he concludes, because my metal detector only found metal, well, plastic doesn't exist, glass doesn't exist, wood doesn't exist. That leap, that's materialism.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. He is confusing the limits of his tool with the limits of reality itself.
Yeah.
And this applies so profoundly to the concept of, say, a transcendent reality or hidden God.
How so?
Well, the sources point out that if a creator exists, they likely don't exist as a physical object inside the universe, just floating around a galaxy waiting to be dissected by a space probe.
Right. They wouldn't be just another item on the checklist of the universe.
Exactly. They would be the silent ground of all existence itself. So it makes perfect sense that scientific instruments wouldn't detect that presence.
Because the instruments are tuned to look at stuff inside the room, not the room itself.
Yes. Just because someone hasn't seen God in a telescope doesn't mean they couldn't have missed him. He wasn't designed to be a laboratory object.
So going back to that microscope analogy from the very beginning, a microscope is not a bad tool. We just aren't ever going to see love through one.
No, we aren't.
We can't measure forgiveness or justice or hope with a telescope. But just because those things are invisible to the tool doesn't mean they're fake. Not everything real was created to fit under a glass cover slip.
And that's the key takeaway here. The absence of evidence in a laboratory is very often just proof of the limits of our instruments. It's not necessarily proof of absence in reality.
That makes a lot of sense. But let me push back a little.
Go for it.
Surely science can at least prove its own logical foundations, right? Like, even if it can't measure meaning or love, the underlying mathematics, the logic, that has to be objective, provable truth.
You would think so. But this actually brings us to the absolute limits of human knowledge. Science relies on several massive assumptions that it absolutely cannot scientifically prove.
Wait, really? Are you saying science relies on unprovable assumptions?
I am.
Because that sounds like the exact opposite of the scientific method. How does that even work?
Well, before the very first experiment even begins, a scientist has to trust a few things. They assume that the external world is real, that our human senses are generally reliable, and that logic actually works.
Okay, but those seem like pretty safe bets.
They are safe bets, but they aren't scientifically provable. Take the 18th century philosopher David Hume and his problem of induction.
I've heard of Hume, but remind me what induction means in this context.
Induction is basically drawing a general conclusion from specific observations. Hume pointed out a glaring logical issue with how we view the world. If I ask you right now, will the sun rise tomorrow? What would you say?
I would say yes, obviously it will.
And if I asked you why?
Because it has arisen every single day of my life and, every day of human history before that. Plus, the laws of physics dictate planetary rotation.
Right. But Hume would point out that you are assuming nature is regular and uniform. You are relying on the past to guarantee the future. But mathematically and logically, you cannot prove that the future will mimic the past without using past experiences as your evidence. It is circular logic. You are using the past to prove the past.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it like that. So, believing the sun will rise isn't really a mathematical certainty. It's just a highly successful habit of trust. We just sort of assume the universe won't suddenly change its rules overnight.
Exactly.
Does this mean science is just like a shot in the dark?
Not at all. It remains our absolute most reliable, self-correcting, collective method for understanding nature, but recognizing that even science requires a foundation of trust. Well, it should inspire deep humility.
Right. It isn't a pure objective view from heaven. It is a human activity built on human assumptions.
Yes. And it isn't just philosophy making this claim. The mathematics itself backs this up.
Wait, math backs up that it can't prove itself.
Yeah, through Kurt Gödel's incompleteness theorem and a really fascinating philosophical concept called the Munchausen trilemma.
Okay. The Munchausen trilemma sounds like a really rare medical condition. What is the actual mechanism there?
So think about a toddler asking why all the time.
Oh, I know that game well.
Right. You tell them it's time for bed. They ask why. You say because it's late. They ask why. You say because the Earth rotated away from the sun. They ask why.
It never ends.
Exactly. The Munchausen trilemma states that when you try to logically justify any foundational truth, you really only have three options, and all of them are flawed.
What are the three options?
First, you fall into an infinite regress. The toddler asks why forever, and you just never reach a bottom layer of truth.
Okay. What's the second?
Second, you use circular logic. You say, it's late because it's bedtime, and it's bedtime because it's late.
Which proves nothing.
Right.
Yeah.
And the third option is you reach a dogmatic stopping point. You just cross your arms and say, because I said so.
So every logical system, at some point, eventually hits a wall where we just have to say, because I said so, and trust the bedrock.
Exactly. And Gödel mathematically proved a very similar concept for formal logic. He showed that any sufficiently complex mathematical system cannot prove all of its own truths from the inside.
It needs an outside reference.
Yes. To prove the system works, you need an outside observer, an outside truth. You cannot pull yourself up by your own bootstraps.
Immanuel Kant talked about this too, didn't he? That we are fundamentally kind of trapped behind our own human-tinted glasses.
Yes, Kant called this our filter. We never actually see the thing in itself, the pure, objective reality of the universe. Our human minds structure reality through our own built-in software. things like space, time, and causality.
So everything you perceive is basically formatted by your brain before you even get to experience it.
Precisely.
Okay, let's bring this grand philosophy down to a more human scale. Because if we accept these limits, that we are looking through a human filter, and that science can't measure things like intention, what happens when we take a strict, reductionist scientific method and apply it to ourselves?
You mean to the human mind? This is exactly where we run into the limits of reductionism.
Yeah.
And there's a great analogy for this: the boiling kettle.
Okay, lay it on me.
Imagine you are in your kitchen, boiling water to make a cup of coffee. A strict reductionist physicist can walk in and flawlessly describe that entire event.
Right.
They can map the electron flow in the stove, the electrical resistance of the heating coil, the kinetic energy of the water molecules turning into steam. They can give you the perfect physical data.
And none of that physical description is wrong. It is completely scientifically accurate.
But look at what it misses. It completely misses the actual meaning of the event. Why is the water actually boiling?
Because a human being wanted a cup of coffee.
Exactly. The
Yeah.
intention. The physicist's description isn't wrong. It is just completely blind to the subject in the room. It's analyzing the steam and completely ignoring the coffee drinker.
Wow. If we only use tools designed to measure third-person objects, isn't it obvious that the first-person subject will just vanish from our data?
Yes, and this perfectly illustrates what the philosopher David Chalmers famously called the hard problem of consciousness.
Which is what, exactly?
Well, neuroscience is doing an incredibly beautiful job mapping the brain's physical correlates. The how, they can put you in an MRI machine and see exactly which neurons fire when you see the color red or when you stub your toe.
Right, they can map the mechanism.
But it fundamentally struggles with the subjective first-person experience, what it feels like. Think about you, the listener, right now. Think about your morning coffee today.
Oh, yeah.
The bitterness on your tongue, the warmth in your chest, that quiet feeling of waking up. A neuroscientist can map the electrical signals in your brain during that moment, but those electrical signals do not explain the actual subjective feeling of what it is like to be you experiencing that coffee.
I've always struggled with that phrase we hear so often in pop science. Man is just chemistry.
Oh, yes.
It feels like such a massive, unjustified leap to go from we are made of chemistry to we are just chemistry.
Philosophers actually call that a category mistake. Strong reductionism confuses the lower-level description, the neurons firing, with the only reality. It completely dismisses the higher-level reality of meaning, love, choices.
I think about old analog radios. Like if you take a sledgehammer and smash a radio, the music stops.
Right.
And if you damage a human brain, consciousness is altered or it stops entirely. But smashing the radio doesn't definitively prove that the plastic dials and the copper wires actually compose the music.
No, it doesn't.
The signal was just passing through the hardware.
It's the metal detector on the beach all over again. You are using a tool that cannot detect consciousness and then boldly declaring that consciousness is just an illusion.
Okay, let me push back a bit here, though. Because if we are more than just chemistry, how does autonomy actually work in a physical universe?
That's the big question.
Right, because are we just like ghosts floating inside a biological machine? That starts to sound a bit mystical for my taste.
It doesn't have to be mystical at all. We can actually look to modern complex systems and artificial intelligence to understand a concept called emergence.
Emergence, how does that work?
Imagine looking down at a sprawling metropolis, a massive city at night, from an airplane window.
Okay.
If a strict reductionist looked out the window and said, this city is just electrons moving in copper wires and carbon atoms vibrating in concrete, they wouldn't be technically wrong. The atoms are there.
Sure.
But they would miss the traffic patterns, the culture, the economic relationships, the entire life of the city.
Because the higher organization, the emergence, is just as real as the atoms that make it up.
Exactly. Think about software. Software is real. It has real-world effects. It runs the global banking system.
Yeah.
But you can't weigh Microsoft Word on a physical scale.
Oh, that's a great point.
And that brings us to the real frontier of this debate: large language models and modern AI.
Right, because AI runs on physical stuff.
Perfectly deterministic hardware. Silicon chips, electrons, rigid physical laws. There is zero magic in the server room. Yet, because of their incredible layered complexity, they exhibit unpredictable behavior.
They show stochasticity, creativity.
Yes. functional autonomy. Even a purely physical machine can develop properties that its creators cannot perfectly predict.
Like the chess master analogy from the sources.
Yes, you can hook a chess grandmaster up to every machine in a hospital. You can perfectly measure their heart rate, their brain waves, their biological state down to the cellular level.
You have perfect data.
Perfect physical data. But looking at all that data will not help you predict their next move on the chessboard.
Because the game of chess, the strategy, exists on an entirely different emergent layer than their blood pressure.
Exactly. This is known as computational irreducibility. In highly complex systems, you cannot simply look at the math or read the starting code to know what the final outcome will be.
You can't just take a shortcut to the answer.
No. The system must actually live or run its course in real time to create its future. Unpredictability isn't a failure of our measuring tools, it's a fundamental feature of autonomy.
Wow.
If a system is completely predictable, if you know every single move it will ever make before it makes them, it's not a mind, it's not a partner or a person, it's just a clockwork mechanism. What's fascinating here is that true intelligence might actually require this unreadable complexity.
So, bringing all of this back to you, the listener, what does this actually mean for our worldview? People always quote Occam's razor.
Sure, the simplest explanation is best.
Yeah. So if we can explain humans as just biological machines, shouldn't we favor that simple explanation?
Well, Occam's razor is a fantastic rule of thumb for troubleshooting a car engine or fixing a software bug, but it is not a fundamental law of the universe.
It's a guideline.
Exactly. The history of human knowledge repeatedly shows us that reality is stranger, deeper, and far less comfortable than simple mechanics, reducing all of human experience to nothing but a byproduct of biology. That's a philosophical worldview. It is not an experimental fact.
Science is a magnificent self-correcting lens. It
Mhm.
really is. It has cured diseases, it's taken us to the moon, it continues to push our survival forward, but it is just one lens.
And this brings us to the core of intellectual honesty.
Yeah.
The absolute, unwavering certainty of the strict materialist is really just as flawed as the absolute certainty of the rigid dogmatist.
Because neither leaves room for mystery.
Right. Intellectual honesty requires leaving room for the unknown. It means realizing that saying the word maybe is not a sign of intellectual weakness.
It's actually our destiny. It's our condition as human beings. Maybe leaves the door open. It acknowledges that the universe is vast and our tools are small.
Which is why our exploration today is just a reminder. Don't let a highly effective method for investigating the physical world blind you to the existential, subjective realities that actually make a human life worth living.
That is so well said. And I want to leave you listening right now with a lingering question, something to just sort of mull over today that builds on everything we've unpacked.
I love a good thought experiment.
Think back to that microscope from the very beginning of our conversation. If the most profoundly real parts of your human experience, your deepest loves, your quietest guilt, those sudden flashes of awe you get when looking at the night sky, if all of that is entirely invisible to the physical instruments we use to define reality, what other magnificent invisible layers of existence are you walking through every single day completely blind to simply because humanity hasn't invented the right lens yet?